Hi, I'm Brian Boyles, Executive Director of Mass Humanities. The video you're about to watch is a conversation we recorded on November 19th, 2021. We convened a group of leaders from the historical societies and museums of Massachusetts to talk about the work they had done, first through online programming that was funded by Mass Humanities' Bridge Street Fund, but second, the ways they took the ideas presented in those programs and grew them into larger projects that are now ongoing and working to serve the communities that they reside in. For Mass Humanities, history is a vibrant, complicated field, and local history in particular has had such a renaissance during this very, very trying time. We have seen organizations of all sizes, but particularly these smaller organizations around the Commonwealth tackle difficult subjects, excavate new stories, and really welcome new audiences using the opportunity of online programming to tap into people and views that they may not have been able to host in the past. The organizations you'll hear from tonight did receive Bridge Street Fund grants, and two of them actually received a second grant from Mass Humanities in 21, Expand Massachusetts Stories. These grants are much larger projects that seek to complicate our thinking around who lives in Massachusetts and the ideas and people who have shaped this Commonwealth's identity over hundreds of years. We're really, really grateful for these individuals to come together and have this conversation, which I really, truly learned a lot from. I always learn a lot from the conversation's moderator, Laura Roberts. She has been a past Mass Humanities board chair, someone who throughout her career has worked for museums and historical societies who are trying to do just the type of work we're talking about. Just prior to recording this conversation, Laura received the New England Museum Association's Lifetime Achievement Award. We congratulated her that night, and I congratulate her again and thank her for hosting this talk.
In terms of how did these grants help us strategically or pragmatically, they really helped us in both ways. These are programs that we were looking to do anyway, but they were things that had to happen while we were technically still closed for the season, and we would be closed no matter if it was COVID or not. We don't open until May 15th generally, so doing these programs on Zoom actually helped us reach a larger audience and gave us access to allow audiences to join us while not having to charge for tickets. And I think that that makes a big difference when it comes to access, certainly. We were reaching new audiences for sure. And those program I want to speak to specifically is our Nathaniel Hawthorne play, which was actually called Mr. Noble Melancholy. Someone actually called him that at one point, and I think it really fits him and his demeanor. And so this was actually a play that was written by a local playwright, a former retired teacher, and they wrote it. It had its world premiere in person in 2019 here. And when we offered it online, thanks to the Bridge Street funds, we partnered with our local community college, so the Berkshire County Community College, and their program called OLLI, which is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. And this is such an amazing program where we find that here in the Berkshires, we have a lot of retirees. And what happens is they are the most intellectually curious people. And so they join OLLI. And so OLLI offers many, many programs, many, many classes, and they are incredibly well attended. They have a huge reach in our county. And so by partnering with OLLI, we were able to extend our reach so far. We had 400 people registered for the program. That is unheard of for us. So now I will say that's how many people registered. I think when it came down to it, how many people actually logged on at the time of the program? Probably more like 200, but still pretty amazing in terms of our numbers and the numbers we're used to seeing. So this was a program we then moved into the house. So we actually performed it in the Herman Melville house. And there were new parts to it. There was a question and answer at the end, which we had a lively discussion at the end. So by partnering with the college, it also allowed us a lot of additional resources. Their reach, their mailing list, their technical prowess, which I don't necessarily have on my own. So I had a moderator from the college who was taking care of all that. I didn't have to worry. So that was such a relief to us. So in terms of new formats, new partners, new audiences, it was such a game changer for us. And in terms of new formats, I will say, you know, we've obviously been doing Zoom, but we did do a hybrid program with our Moby Dick Marathon at the end of July. This was the 5th year, I think, we've done the Moby Dick Marathon. We're not totally crazy. We don't read for 24 hours straight like they do in New Bedford. We do stop and we take it, you know, about 10 to 5 every day. But this year it meant that we were able to offer it in a hybrid format. And that was definitely a learning curve. But it was meant one person in the room and the next person may have been waiting on Zoom. So that took a little bit of practice, but once we got into it, it was much easier to manage than we initially thought. So that's certainly something that we'll actually be bringing forward, especially as times are still quite uncertain. People aren't as excited to come out in public, especially now that it's getting a little colder. So certainly something that we'll carry forward with us. And that was an extremely successful program for us too. We actually had a surprise reader who is a huge Melville fan, unbeknownst to us. And all of a sudden, you know, up on the screen, the name popped up, Paul Giamatti. And so Paul Giamatti is apparently a huge Melville fan. I don't know if some of you heard, he read for an NPR program over COVID in the early part of 2020. And yeah, he just popped up in our marathon and he was so moving and so amazing. We actually asked him to read the end of the book and it brought people to tears. And, you know, I say that, but it was true. It was a pretty amazing experience. So those are all things that happened thanks to the Bridge Street funds that we received. We were extremely pleased with the way they all went, and we're actually excited about the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant that we are embarking upon now.
In the summer of 2020, the museum was, of course, closed to visitors and summer interns working at socially distanced tables in the very ventilated spaces of the veranda and the corn barn, and mostly with masks on, were able to process recently donated family papers and post stories about what they found on the museum's website. And that was really excellent, useful stock-taking time, and it permitted the museum to make real progress in processing collections that had been backing up. But that was pretty passive sharing of new research, and it didn't really find ways to actively reach out to audiences. People had to decide to go to the website and click on what's happening at the museum to hear those stories. So facing a second summer of closure in 2021, it was really crucial to develop some means to engage audiences. And it just felt like such a gift when the Bridge Street grant was offered and the museum received one. So that was just an enormous boon for prodding us to think about how we could reach out. And the museum ran 5 presentations. They were Zoom sessions and some lectures and book talks that are formats that the museum's used in live programming in the past, but also a number of conversations between different people with relations to the museum or its history that worked really well on Zoom to have 2 people talking to each other. And that was a format that the museum had not used as often in its public programming. And the people who presented ranged from prominent scholars to a past summer intern who had done particularly exciting research. And Zoom allowed us to inexpensively bring in speakers from as far away as Oregon. So people who'd worked with the Porter Phelps Huntington papers who are now way too far for us to have been able to have had them come and present in an in-person mode. And really pleasurably and surprisingly, many audience members came from far beyond the local as well. We had people from New York and Wisconsin and California who came and attended Zoom programs. And that kind of audience catchment has really not generally been the case for museum programs. We hadn't planned it this way when we were inviting speakers. We were just thinking, who's done new work? Who would be interesting to ask to speak? But the stories that unfolded in these events made links between the Porter Phelps Huntington House and other local cultural institutions and histories in ways that proved really provocative and productive for us. So Anna Plummer, who had been a summer intern at the museum and also a tour guide at the Emily Dickinson Museum, presented her findings on the friendship between Emily Dickinson and Susan Phelps of Phelps Farm. And Bill Harley gave a presentation on Clifton Johnson's photographs that not only attracted very far-flung Johnson family members, but also helped us to think about the relationship between two Hadley cultural institutions in ways that I think we'd known before, but really hadn't articulated as clearly. When Clifton founded the Hadley Farm Museum to house his collection of farm implements, he needed a building for it. And James Lincoln Huntington, who wanted to tell a genteel story about his forebears and the illustrious men in his family, didn't much want the Porter Phelps Huntington's barns and other outbuildings. And so he happily donated it to house the Farm Museum, turning its stone foundation into an elegant sunken garden, which is where the concerts now still happen in the summer. So those kind of overlaps really got us thinking about not just the historic connections between local cultural institutions, but also the potential for developing future connections. And this fall, the museums participated in drafting a joint grant proposal for joint programming with 4 other Hadley institutions. And we have other incipient collaborations that are all feeling very exciting and promising. And we don't really know where it will lead, but our Bridge Street program surprised us in bringing forward stories that linked various small local historical institutions in the Valley. And it's clear that paying attention to those connections is a sustaining thing. So at Porter Phelps Huntington, we called our Bridge Street program Bridging the Past and Present, and I'll give the 2021 summer interns credit for that good title. And I think in real ways, the experience of those summer programs is helping us to forge a bridge to a more collaborative future. And I think as part of that too, I want to give a shout out to the Pioneer Valley History Network, and both the revolution happened here and the documenting the early history of Black lives in the Connecticut River Valley program. I think certainly the second of those projects, and maybe both of them, had Mass Humanities funding, but there were other sites this summer that got the museum to work together with other local institutions to think about what are the larger history stories we can be telling. By the time the Bridge Street grant programs launched, the Porter Phelps Huntington Foundation had already submitted grant proposals for an NEH More Perfect Union and a Mass Humanities Expanding Massachusetts Stories grant programs to undertake a significant reinterpretation initiative for the museum that would no longer center the museum's narrative on the family who owned this homestead, but will draw on a growing body of exciting new research, including many of the work of people who presented in the Bridge Street programs, to offer a more inclusive interpretive experience, reflecting the lives of Indigenous, enslaved, indentured, and day laborers on the site. The Bridge Street programs we offered were primarily centered in that new research, letting us see what stories were most interesting to our audiences. And I think when we were fortunate enough to receive those grants, having spent the summer talking about this history and hearing community questions about it, really launched us into the reinterpretation work in a much more grounded and better way than would have happened if we hadn't been practicing telling these stories and thinking about them all summer. And when hopefully, surely, maybe the museum reopens for the public in the summer of 2022, we expect to be able to tell a much more inclusive, larger story about all the lives in this region. So thank you.
We wanted to tell the stories of people we had historically purposefully excluded. And we got the Bridge Street grant, and we decided to do some programming on Black history. So we did two amazing events. Our first amazing event was, we had already had an intern. We had money for an intern who we hired to do some research on Black people in the years leading up to and immediately following the American Revolution. So she was doing this great work, put together this history hub, and she was able to get us Dr. Taya Miles to do a program, which is no small feat, and we're huge fans of hers. And she lives right here in Cambridge. She was teaching at Harvard, and she came and gave a great program about Harriet Jacobs. And the students also talked about their work with Cambridge women abolitionists and the place that Jacob was right at the center. It was amazing. It's on YouTube, go check it out. Our second event was with Dr. Janie Ward, who is a woman who lives in Cambridge, and she was researching, yes, National Book Award winner, just to say, like, you know, graduates of our programs are just, you know, National Book Award winners, but that's Cambridge for you. Our second event, Dr. Janie Ward did this amazing presentation on the history of her home. And when she talked about her house, it really led to a larger conversation about how neighborhoods in Cambridge were developed. And she was Black, she's Black, an amazing storyteller. We were all riveted just to hear her, just like sit and hear her talk about her neighborhood and how people were able to get homes, how her parents were able to get the home. And the whole thing was remarkable. There was this neighborhood, freed enslaved people in Cambridge settled and formed a neighborhood. And this is a lot of white faces on the call. The post-event surveys, the most common comment that we heard was, I didn't know anything about this history. And that was remarkable because the Black people in Cambridge know about it. The white people don't. And that really like hit home for us. We were like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We haven't been telling their story, and nobody has been telling their story. They've been talking amongst themselves, and there's been a huge divide. And it's important for us as public historians and as a historical organization to fill in all those gaps in the historical record. And it's our duty, because of how we were a white supremacist organization, to go back and fill in those gaps. We have a responsibility to do that. If we don't share the whole history of this place that we call home, we're not doing our job. We use history to make a better Cambridge, and we're not doing that if we don't tell everybody's stories. Preaching the choir here, I understand. So both of those events were some of our best attended events ever. So we had, both those events combined, over 100 people were on them live, but over 500 people have watched on YouTube. So it's just every time I go check YouTube, those numbers keep going up. And I think it's word of mouth. And we've been posting those videos, like we've made compilations, like if you're interested in the Black history of Cambridge, here's some resources that we have. And so people find that and watch them. So Zoom, of course, we know is a pro and a con, but we've really embraced that people were interested in this topic. And a lot of folks who have moved away, especially people that grew up on that street with Dr. Ward, tuned in from California, shared their own stories, and it was great. And I think these people, there was one woman who just kept calling to like double check she got the Zoom right. And she invited her Aunt Lucy, who lives down in such and such, and she's conjoined by phone, right? And just kept calling to like double check that this was happening, because this was the history of their street. And it just felt, I think we forget sometimes, because our history is so often represented, that if your history is not represented and then all of a sudden it is, how valuable that is to you. And it just, a lot of things just clicked for us. It was amazing. So we knew that people wanted to know about Black history. They said as much, and they were surprised and they were interested. And so that really told us that we need to do this. And I think another important aspect of doing these programs and highlighting Black history with Black speakers, sharing that history, was that we were growing trust in the Black community in Cambridge, which we hadn't done. We had never done that. We hadn't dedicated ourselves to that. And so we did. And this all sort of flows into our expanding Massachusetts Stories grant, in that we were like, hey, you know, people really care about this history. Let's do more of it. We're really interested in it. So we started to write out a plan for 2022. We sketched out some programs, and because we had done the programs in the past with the Bridge Street grant, we had the support of folks who were able to write us letters of support and say that we're behind you on your next project. And it was proof of concept that we could do the work and that we would, you know, honor it and do it well.
As I look through all of the funding that we have gratefully received from Mass Humanities, it's sort of weaves into every area of difficulty and opportunity that we faced across the last year, all across many years in terms of their overall support, but support for general operating through CARES Act and support grants, digital capacity grants to help us do more online to capture knowledge held by experienced local historians and volunteers. And the Bridge Street Foundation specifically helped us carry off a program and a community symposium that we held on May 1st. The History Center, so some background, was founded in 1978 by a German immigrant named Eartha Dangler. We are located in the former Essex Company offices and yard, a site listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and located in downtown Lawrence. The Essex Company was chartered in 1845 to build the Great Stone Dam to sell water power to a textile industry that wasn't here yet. So we hold the bulk of the Essex Company records, and in them are engineering records, sale deeds, all of the records that represent what it took to build this planned industrial city. And we feel that our location is very important to what we do as a research archive. We have thousands and thousands of linear feet of archival materials, and to be housed in the former headquarters of the Essex Company to be able to share and preserve the records of the Essex Company really helps us to tell a broader story of this immigrant city, an immigrant city then and an immigrant city now. The groups, the locations that people have come from has changed, but we're very much, I think we're 39% foreign born at this moment in time. So the immigrant stories are continuously told. And the topics, the subject matter in our archive really covers all curriculum areas, and really every local, regional, national, and even international story that you want to read about, we have information in our archive for researchers to come to explore. Lawrence is a small city, 6.5 square miles of landmass, and so we're able to provide a really significant snapshot for researchers who come from all over the world, but from local institutions like MIT, Harvard, UMass Lowell, the whole system. We get interns and researchers to come into the archive to learn more. The Bridge Street Grant funded 3 speaking programs that were part of our broader 11-session academic symposium. We have been doing these since 2012, when we commemorated the centennial anniversary of the 1912 Bread and Roses strike. After that, we tackled urban renewal, and then public health. Who would have thought that public health might have been relevant in 2018 when we commemorated the centennial of the 1918 flu pandemic? And then, I'm sorry, and we've also covered new immigration, so post-World War II immigration into the city. Our next symposium, the topic of which was chosen at least a year before the Merrimack Valley gas explosions, certainly before the pandemic became known to us, but that topic was public safety. And in the wake of the racial unrest throughout the country after the death of George Floyd, all of the other issues that were coming forth related to COVID and shutdowns and difficulties across the board, having this subject of public safety got more and more relevant as we move forward. But how to tackle this subject in a virtual way was the biggest question that we had. Really, in prior years, we were able to convene anywhere from 170 to 300 people in an adjacent mill space, that's 500 square foot mill space right out my window here. And we're able to bring people together around difficult topics. And how do we take probably the most challenging topic and convene people in a virtual way around that, which has had so many facets. So as an archive, the subject of public safety has many things under that umbrella. But as we learned that public safety to segments of the population is the police or racialized violence. So we had to step back and really think about what our mission as an organization is, as a non-political organization, struggling with topics of bias or neutrality. As an archive, you certainly don't want to teach a single narrative. So getting this funding from Bridge Street helped us in a lot of ways, helped us push forward and be able to hold the symposium, which was attended by 130 people virtually. Helped us continue doing that, but helped us explore other platforms other than Zoom, because we had a little additional resources in which to do that. So the platform on which we delivered the symposium panels was called Huba. It's a virtual platform. It's kind of driven by Zoom, but it has more interactive components to it. And delivering content on and that platform also connected us more closely to the Mass History Alliance, the folks organizing the Mass History Conference, the Mass Shrab Board, State Historical Records Advisory Board, on which I'm on, to talk about delivery of content, because the Mass History Conference was also on Huba, and they went after us, so we went first. So there was a lot of dialogue around that.
Thank you. We've got to wind up. I think we have invented another grant program for Mass Humanities. Catherine, I hope you're paying attention, which would be the Democratizing History grant category. If democracy demands wisdom.
That's all our grant categories, Laura.
But let's really think about that theme of really putting the power and the authority for history in the hands of the people who have lived it. Brian, you get the last word.
My one last word is thanks. My experience tonight has been yet another opportunity to really hear directly from you all, and the many things that come up when we do get to talk. You know, in full transparency, when we thought about the Bridge Street Fund back in, it was really late 2019, late 2020, a lot of the conversations were about how to just make sure we were still providing some funding to just help out in the meantime as we were getting the other opportunities up and running. And then these online programs started coming up, and we said, okay, let's put it towards this. I'm kind of a silver linings person, and I think the things you all are talking about, not just about reaching audience, but about people being able to participate in this local history because of this new format, is really, really important, and something that, you know, whatever the course of the pandemic is going to continue to grow. And I think is a place for us over this last year of seeing this work being done. It was almost a way to tap in directly to what you're thinking about. You didn't have to think about putting things on the wall or what it was going to cost to come in the door. It was really a direct window, and to see that grow into these Expand Massachusetts Stories grants and now the Democratizing History grants is really, really exciting. So thanks for ending up our week in a really positive place. I really do appreciate all of you being here tonight.